Oh, did I just throw that water? That's okay, we got an extra.
Disaster. Waterproof.
You have copies, Stephanie?
I brought my own. Yep, I'm good.
Computers. These can go into the file.
Yeah, I have an extra. Is this yours?
I've got one.
Oh,
have
that's
one?
an extra, I guess.
Are we ready?
I think we're ready.
Go.
Okay, call the meeting to order. I guess the first on the agenda is 20 The Boulevard. Come on down.
Do you need an easel?
Hmm?
Do you need an easel?
If I need an easel, I can just hold it up.
Okay, we have one. It's just-
Move over and you can use these two chairs.
Anybody else need part two?
I have a copy.
Terribly disorganized. No worries.
No, Stephanie's.
Because this is like the 18th Wednesday in a row that we've all been together. Okay, here's this if you want it. You don't want
Okay,
it.
okay. Can everybody see this?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay. Do you want it to be seen, go over there, or?
Am I in your way?
No.
Okay.
Okay. So, if you remember last time, we talked about a number of things, including creating a kind of little bit of a family resemblance between the addition and the carriage house garage structure. So, you can see the straight-on view with the hyphen, which, following the suggestion that you made last time, which that those looser linkages actually help the whole ensemble. We increased that by a foot, which I think helps. It's subtle, but it's actually noticeable and works. We then made some adjustments in this shape with the gable and the little eave that is not developed to the same extent that it is in the carriage house garage, but it just is enough to give it a family resemblance, and also distinctly, after the hyphen, kind of differentiated from the 1820s house. And that, if you can see the sort of hierarchy and the molding regime has been developed so that we looked carefully at what we could see in the sketches and photographs and other buildings from that era. So there's if you look at well, you'll see it on the other end elevations, but this is now developed as an OG gutter system. We're not proposing to do a box gutter, a wooden box gutter, or a built-in kind of Yankee gutter like would have been there, but we're going to do a copper OG gutter that's follows that form with a return at the end, so that you've got you'll see it in the other elevation that it's kind of a little more developed as a molding regime, and that's distinct from the simpler version on the addition. So a number of things are differentiating: the shape, the roof shape, the sort of hyphen with a standing seam, because that's a collecting point. So for practical reasons, also just again to give more differentiation in the that kind of collection of buildings between the roofing systems. And then the siding, we tried to make the siding exposure really distinctly different, so that you've got matching the original exposure here, which is roughly 4.5 to 6.5, 7 on the addition. So you're looking at some the steps coming down, and then a brick base. We're kind of the existing addition from, let's say, 1909 had a brick base, but again, to differentiate as you get around the building from the stone foundation on the original building, so we're going to a different system again. Looking from the opposite side, again, you can see the brick base coming around, the hyphen, which is kind of highly glazed, and then that original the kind of leftover remnants record of previous additions that we're just leaving those openings intact, and we're obviously using this same kind of window treatment and the beaded profile that we've discovered there, and on the casing with the head casing and shutters, and a slightly different, simpler molding and gutter setup at the edge of that roof, because there were differences from front to back, and we're sort of didn't want to try to suddenly make everything neat. You know, the same thing that we were doing in the back in the elevation, you know, getting to, again, too matchy with that same molding for which we had no evidence in the back. So we're just keeping it simpler in the back. The standing seam is on the roof of the overhang, and simple kind of Tuscan columns, continuous steps, so that we don't have to get involved in a railing system that would really obscure that whole, that whole elevation. So there's continuous on and off at that point. You can see the screen porch, which is actually set back, as is, this whole arrangement. Looking at the end elevation, again, you see the difference between the overhang and gutter treatment here, with a kind of console that supports that gutter, the OG making its return. Really simpler approach here, with a little, I don't have the enlarged detail, but it's much simpler and more straightforward. And then we're looking at looking here, you're kind of seeing a cross section through. So we're, maybe we haven't shown this elevation before, but it's the elevation that this is the outline of the building. So we're kind of showing you, seeing X-raying through the building. And this is a basement entry, which is off an extension of that lower areaway where you get to the original kitchen, and then that allows a person door into the basement, which exists from here on this side. So we get another little window into the brick. The brick steps down because the whole, as you remember, the whole floor levels step down and then allow a little excursion up into the attic. So we've got a couple of dormers up in the attic. And then from this point, you would actually be, the garage would actually be obscuring some of the building, so that's, again, we're sort of looking through it to see the entrance into the breezeway. And just to remind you, this is the plan with these linkages. So we have the hyphen, the areaway extension, the screen porch, breezeway, which is slightly more generous, I think, than in the last iteration, the carriage house, and these are lattice enclosures following the important lattice guidelines that we've developed. And they're, because we're anticipating, obviously, that we have to deal with the stuff that you wind up with out in the landscape. So we decided to use the rear of this carriage house as a way of corralling that stuff and separating it, so we don't have one big monolith, but we have two little enclosures for the condensing units and then the pool equipment. So, and we'll just assume that the umbilical cords are, can make it at that distance, or we have the right kind of pump technology to do that. So that's a good look at the overall plan. Let's see if this. Then this elevation, sorry, which gets a little complicated because, and it probably, if you actually had reflecting, the glass reflecting and so on, it wouldn't look as like plaids on plaids, but there are, you're seeing through the breezeway to back to glazing, internal glazing, but this is a pitched roof, and then over, which is a shed against the building, and then as it emerges, kind of from the building, it is a double pitched roof, and again, that's at 3 and 12, I think, so that you can do standing seam. And then the back side of the carriage house, screen porch, and this set of elevations which are reflecting the level changes as you enter, come to lower level, you wind your way up. There's a landing, and then on your way up to the second level, which is consistent with the second level in the oldest building, and then a half level up to the attic. So finally, in elevations, the carriage house, pretty much what we had last time with this is a kind of section through the breezeway, the kicked out eave that wraps around. Again, this is related to what's happening on the addition, but this is more extended, and it has that second angle. So it's a relative, but it's much more differentiated. There's an internal staircase to a loft that with the man door over here. It wouldn't be a flush door like that. Those would all be ladder doors. And then a kind of divided paneled set of 3 doors into the garage, and lattice enclosure, the 2 lattice enclosures on the back. So that's kind of pretty much the story on the elevations. I've got I think, I'm gonna pass these out, yeah, okay. So these are SketchUp views, which are, you know, kind of a Photoshop landscape, which may or may not have a relationship to what's there, but better than white, stuff, kind of outer space kind of stuff. And again, this is looking, I think this was a view that you were interested in, Kathleen, or from that angle, coming around a little bit further, and you start to see the whole deal. We don't have the lattice enclosures on this model yet. And we're trying to suggest the, you know, putting sort of downing colors on the early 19th century portion, you know, his sort of sandy, taupey colors, and then departing from that on the newer portions.
Are there wells around these windows?
Yeah, yeah, they're, that's the suggestion, is that those would be window wells. Just to get a little light into the basement at that point.
You guys are hogging them all down there.
There would be full basements on all these?
No, there's a partial basement. The lower level where it let's see, at this point, thanks.
Choose your adventure.
So, as you get down here, that's a slab on grade. So the basement goes from here to the front of the addition. And there's, you know, there's a basement in the addition, in the original house, obviously, but only a partial basement that connects to that in the,
And all
in
the
the
rest of
existing
it is-
building.
And all the rest of it is slab.
Yeah, that's exactly right, yeah. So the basement is kind of like, well, this portion of the building is, this portion of the building is the basement, this portion of the building is slab.
Do I have any comments from other board members?
I have a question.
Question?
The camera flat is going to be here, and I'm wondering how visible that's going to be from the train.
I'm wondering about that from the parking lot. Yeah, I was wondering about that too. Where is the image that shows the shared back? What is the this is interesting. I hadn't thought about that before. That you would sort of I'm looking at the basement level.
Oh, extend
here.
that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you would extend that walkway underneath. It makes me think about the grove, how the well turns the corner at the grove.
Right, yeah.
What's the depth here? Like how far off the corner is that?
It's about
The height.
16 inches. You can see that it's right there. It's that, this is quarter scale, so it's a little, you know, it's we're trying to trying to set this back and maintain a 4-foot opening on that, at that upper level into the building. So it's enough to create a, significant shadow line. I mean, I always say that you need 4 inches for even a minor shadow line, and so if you can get better than that, then it starts to become really work.
And what's the width of the hyphen there, between the new and the old?
I think the hyphen is 10 feet. Yeah, this is 4 feet, so it's about 10 feet, the total width.
No, I mean the width between the buildings.
It's now 8 feet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think it was 7 feet or 6 and change. So it's, again, it moves us over. We're still okay on the coverage.
And the scenic Hudson rules?
Yeah, the scenic Hudson rules apply.
I know they apply, but I mean.
No, they still apply.
You're still okay.
We still conform to scenic Hudson rules. Yeah, it's.
Did you consider, I think last time that you had the breezeway area without muntins because it was just an early drawing phase, but
Right, exactly.
I'm feeling as if the muntins sort of draw your eye to a place you were trying not to see as much. I love the concept of the connection between the two. I'm wondering about maybe less busyness to sort of let that fade into the background a bit.
I think you may be right that that maybe it should be a more vertical lights, bigger vertical lights, maybe.
I mean, you have to have something so
You know what I
someone doesn't
mean?
go running into them, but.
These, I don't know what the bird, what the bird dimension flying into windows thing is, but.
I was thinking of child dimensions flying in from the outside, but.
Maybe reducing it by 1 and getting more vertical, bigger vertical things might actually be a good idea. Yeah, because again, that's probably the least
Can you touch
seriously,
that?
least studied portion of this.
It's nice
the whole-
because on the screen porch, you have these
That's what I
really
was thinking
big,
too, yeah.
panes, quote unquote, of screen.
Yeah.
So to kind of make a closer connection, so you have kind of, 2 kind of airy open volumes next to each
And
other.
are these the doors?
Yeah.
Yeah, those are the doors.
Yeah, so we'd have a better conversation visually with the doors.
Yeah.
I think that the verticality on the river facade of the addition is a great leap forward from where we were
Yeah.
in differentiating.
Yeah, you can see the whole, on that elevation, I forgot to point that out, because Al has come back to that several times, that we added this whole transom setup, and we then followed through with the transom over the doors coming out of the hyphen, and I think that does help, because this really differentiates that. It kind of follows through on the bigger vertical emphasis on the original building, but also makes that elevation work, because it was just sort of more static.
What are the slopes on the original roof line versus the slope on the major addition?
The slope, I have that data.
You can see that, where's
think
the east elevation, so that's the slope.
Yeah, right. It's a slightly steeper slope on the original building, which I think is 5 and 12, and I think maybe we're at 4 and 12 on the addition. I kind of told him to turn off layers because I didn't want to see the data layers, and so he turned off the slope designation.
What's
I
this,
think that's what it is.
what's this thing on the roof representing, this white box?
There is an existing little skylight opening in that roof.
Yeah, there's a hatch
roof
there.
hatch.
Yeah.
Is it, and there's glass in it?
No, there isn't glass now. No.
It's just a,
That's a thought, though.
it's just a
You can
hatch?
we can bring
It's
some
just
light in. It's a
pointless
hatch.
hatch?
Right. I don't know how
Fire
you
escape.
you get out on that sloping roof. It's kind of
Well, it was probably to clean the chimneys or something.
yeah.
Sean, the comment that led us here last time was yours, and thinking about relating the garage and the addition more to each other and departing. Do you feel like that goal has been?
Yeah, I think that it's certainly, it is, yeah. It's what I was, not what I was picturing as far as the design, but it's what I was picturing as far as the commonality between the two. I think that it separates it more from the oldest volume on the property. I mean, you know, obviously there's other, you know, even though we're not supposed to talk about it, I mean, the color is also going to play a huge role too, but I think just in terms of like the form and the references, it helps to pull it further away.
Yeah.
Right, and I think it does a very good job of essentially sort of isolating and highlighting the main building, which is, I think, the whole point. So, I think what you did worked well.
I appreciate the sort of Dutch feel of the garage.
Mhm.
I appreciate the way you've echoed that in the gable end. I wasn't convinced initially how that heavy gable end was going to sit with the main structure, but the more time I spend with it, the more I like it.
Well, I
Through
think
the contrast.
to Carolyn's point, it almost exaggerates how much less steep
Mhm.
the pitch on the addition is, which I think makes it look smaller and makes it seem subservient in a way. And I don't know if that would have been quite so highlighted without that motif. Even though you don't, I mean, you never really, I mean, I guess if you were really craning your neck, you would kind of see both
Well, it
pitches
gives
sort of
it a
next to each other,
shadow,
but
so it literally pushes it back.
yeah.
It gives the illusion that it's pushed back in space. It's not, the plane is broken up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think adding the basement windows too on this facade and the brick in those wells, that also kind of makes it
Mhm.
seem, I don't know, that
Well,
also
echoes
pushing it
the-
back too. I mean, maybe it's just
yeah.
seeing it fleshed out in 3D as opposed to seeing it in the 2D drawing where everything looks so like in your face, but,
Well, you know what, it anchors, by creating this well here, it anchors this volume, this mass down into the ground and highlights that, you know, this is the original, this is
Mhm.
much lighter looking, and it just stands out on its own.
Yeah, no, I
It's
think
a very
it's
different
interesting that it actually, that those things have that impact.
Mhm.
It's kind of interesting, yeah.
yeah, and the porch on the original volume too, having the, I don't know if that was on your previous drawing, having the stairs go all the way across, but
I think
it gives it some
it-
more
it's- yeah,
grandiosity.
It's gotten developed here. Yeah.
That's the one place I was really worried, thinking about how a railing would impact. So
Yeah.
I'm really pleased to see you go in that direction.
Yeah.
How about the how are we feeling about the shared well area on the driveway side?
I think I mean, I think that the original well is such a cool part of this building. So I'm neither, I don't know, I don't really have a feeling about it being extended onto the addition. I think it kind of makes them make a little bit more sense together. In a lot of ways, it may even draw the eye a little bit more to the well, which I think would be a good thing. I don't know about the depths and everything, but if you know, if you're going to be adding to, I mean, it is below grade, so it would be very hard to see it from a lot of places, and if by adding this additional well depth on the addition, if that ends up being a place where you could put some of the condensers and things, if they are too far away from the
Yeah,
building.
you know, the problem with that is it's acoustical, because you
It'll
can,
echo.
Oh, of course,
you
if
get
you're
the
kind of
machinery at
putting it into an
42
amplifier.
decibels in a recess, you know, with hard surfaces,
Right.
it'll drive you crazy. Even though the new condensing units are, you know, they claim it's sewing machine noise, but it's
Mhm.
still,
Still sounds like a
But if you
sewing
need a
machine.
place to
Yeah.
put the garbage cans before you take them out, it's a good place to, you know, kind of stick them in that little
yeah.
corner.
I mean, the other thing it will do, you know, it's a pretty funky place right now because the brick is all falling down, you know, that shallow foundation, and there's other stuff happening there. And it's actually gonna reveal the stone foundation of the
Mhm.
original building
Mhm.
also, so that you're gonna
You get
see
it
that
there.
now for the first time in a long time.
And I
Well-
like that it,
Just following up on what Carolyn said is that chances are you're gonna need some sort of guardrail there.
Yes.
And so
Yeah,
you can probably do something which is, you know, a place where you put trash cans, maybe some of the air conditioning equipment and so on,
yeah.
which would put it outside of it and certainly less.
You mean the guardrail around the well?
Well, along that, because,
Yeah,
you
'cause
know,
otherwise
it's gonna
kids
be
will
a
fall into
visual
that well.
element, so
Yeah.
maybe if it has some depth to it, that's where the trash cans go, that's where some of the air conditioning equipment goes.
Well, it's a pretty deep well. I would say, I think one of the things I like about extending the well is that, you know, back in the 1820s, these people had the right idea that if there were certain utilitarian functions you wanted to conceal, you kind of put them underground, or at least in this case down in the well, like with the Grove, you know, and they were useful, but also it's a way of even letting light into the basement in a village that has a 35-foot height limit, among other things.
Mhm.
And, you know, so that you get usable space down there that actually can get light into it. And it, you know, and you always need utilitarian space to just chuck stuff.
You'd also end up with a strange dead space if you didn't extend over at
Right.
the end of the well before the new building.
Yeah, and you
That'd
have
be
the
a lost
opportunity,
space.
Safer
you would
having
have
it
another
dug out.
opportunity for another door right into the basement,
Mhm.
rather than having come in from the other part of the house and going down into it.
Yeah, no, that, and
You know,
Andreas,
it's a useful thing.
who's been drawing this stuff up, was a big advocate of that, so.
I know you kind of imagine yourself in the space after a while, it's weird.
Right.
well, I like that it tells the story of the house. This is the utilitarian side, this is where the servants would enter. This is a 3-story structure, and we have a lot of examples of that, obviously, all over the village. We're all built into a hill. This, instead of creating, and the entire village landscape is littered in retaining walls. But this is a much more elegant retaining wall, and that's what I like about it.
Without making a judgment one way or another, since we haven't completed the CEQA process, does anybody see anything which they feel would be a fatal flaw on what Steve has come up with?
I don't see anything that's a fatal flaw. I think you've made terrific progress. Just the two things that I think about that could be improved, and that is the fenestration on the breezeway, and also I share Andrea's concern, and I sort of want to go walk around the parking lot and try to imagine the visibility of the equipment on the back of the garage from the train station.
On the
I mean,
back
it's
on the
going to
back
be
of
pretty
the
far
garage-
back.
On the back of the garage, I didn't think you'd be able to see it from the train station. The house, that face of the house right now is visible from 20 the Boulevard because it's winter time. And you know, we discount,
Right.
you know, vegetation. But it's going to be low, fairly, you know, relatively speaking, and from a far distance away, and at least in terms of the HDRB rules, I think as long as the lattice is in keeping with our standards, you gotta put the stuff someplace.
Well,
You know,
it's,
and
there's
next
a,
to a garage is better than next to the house.
absolutely,
Mhm.
no question. I just, having walked down there recently, it is surprising how much, when you actually walk through that parking lot, how much of that side of the site is actually visible down there. I suspect that it's going to be, the depth is going to be enough back that you're not going to notice those, and yes, the back of an addition that's a garage is probably the best
It's also kind of like
place.
a weird,
It's
you're
at an
getting
angle,
this like
yeah.
quarter turn too,
Right.
but, oh, sorry, but,
And it's hard to see this in this rendering, yeah.
yeah.
It will
Is,
push
would
back
there
at an
be,
angle.
I mean, when it comes to you know, to this
Yeah.
point where it can be drawn out a little bit better, is there any reason why, would this be a less visible elevation of the garage to put the same thing?
The only practical problem with that is
Not enough
there's
space.
the distance from the air handlers to the condensing units is, there's an umbilical cord limit, like I said, with refrigerant, and I'm pushing the limit already, and otherwise I'm gonna, you know, then I'm back in the vicinity of the old building, and I don't wanna be there, so
Right.
I'm being hopeful about this. The other thing is that the pool is over here, and I really didn't wanna have a little doghouse out by the pool, you know, that with the filtration and the pumps
Oh, the
and all
pool's
that
on
stuff.
this, going,
Yeah,
facing this side, okay, I was thinking
No,
Yeah.
it's
this way.
it's facing this
Northish.
side.
yeah, it's kind of out there, you know, so,
Mhm.
I don't know if,
Fire.
you know, Glenn's latest drawing where it is, but, you know, it's, we've got it out in here, and I really didn't wanna have a thing floating around here with equipment, so I thought, okay, we'll attach it to the garage, and then also you're, you're looking at the garage, and the garage is, you know, maybe a sort of middle color, and you're not seeing it against something that's brighter, you're sort of, you know, sort of against something that's already, an object, so.
You're required to have fencing around the pool, yes?
Yeah, there'll have to be a
And-
pool fence.
So I guess, and again, just from the view shed perspective, you're gonna have not just a pool, but you're gonna have fencing around the pool, and then it may be that, you know, you're gonna provide landscaping, you know, or there may be some element of privacy that you want to the pool area. So, in general, I don't know to what extent landscaping, because, you know, we're looking at the structure itself.
Well, the fence would be within our purview, because
Yeah.
it's above grade.
Yeah.
Remember from the Metro North side, looking up, this is at an elevation.
Mm-hmm.
You would probably not even see the full front porch of this building, or at least the ground level of the
Yeah,
front
you do.
porch. No, you can't see the whole thing. You can't see the ground level of the porch.
At this, you walk down again. I was really surprised on a recent walk at how truly visible it is in the parking lot.
No, it's visible, but I don't think the entirety of, if you go back from the front facade of the house, back even a little bit, you're not seeing the entirety of these things. You're seeing a certain amount cut off at the ground level.
Of the
Just above the ground.
structures,
Yeah,
of the additions?
yeah.
Mm.
I think one of the things that you may wanna take a
I mean,
look at.
unless you're going up on the hill next to, the Chapel of Restoration and looking from there, I mean, that's a different thing, but it's,
Anyway, we should walk around.
One of the things that you may wanna look at, sort of picking up on what Bonnie says, as part of the enclosure for the swimming pool, you're gonna have fences and so on. We've had people in the village who have built stone walls or brick walls to block the views of air conditioning equipment. So, you know, you may come up with some sort of arrangement where, you know, that becomes your screening for the equipment that you don't associate with.
Yeah, we haven't dealt with the pool, you know, that
Well,
whole
and that's a question I
aspect of
have
it.
for Bonnie, because that's obviously, it's an in-ground pool, right? So it's an excavation point.
Yeah.
And so when the archaeologists were considering
Mm-hmm.
that, I have it with me, was the pool mapped out, the location of the pool mapped out in the site plan then?
Yes,
Okay,
It
so
was
that's
on-
already dealt with.
right, in fact, in our memo on page 3 of 6, we showed actually the original layout, and then the driveway was flipped, the
Oh,
pool
yeah.
moved.
Yep.
So they definitely show the pool in the site plan, and at least in terms of these two iterations, Joe Diamond indicated there were sufficient shovel tests
Yeah, right, I
to
saw that.
capture what disturbances are shown on these two plans. So, at some point when the board is ready and feels comfortable with the massing of the building and there's limits of disturbance established, then the archaeologist will look at whether or not additional shovel tests are needed or not, that they stay within what they already examined. But again, I think you have to get to the point where you're comfortable with the massing and kind of the size of the area that's gonna be disturbed.
So, with that, let me ask the board members if, I mean, basically what I've heard is that we think this is a good direction to go as far as this, that it addresses a lot of our concerns. Obviously, it's not, the final configuration until after the secret vote, but certainly I think that this is, if we do replace the existing addition, this would be the direction that we would want them to pursue. Am I correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that.
Mm-hmm.
Good,
You think you did a good job there,
Good.
Steve?
thank you. Do you want these illustrations, or
It'd be good to have.
do you want
some.
not
we
to have
wanna-
paper?
So,
Yeah, no,
so there
I-
has to
I think
be,
it'd be good to have at least one copy in our file.
Yeah,
If we
okay.
could get electronic copies, that would even be better.
No, I can send you PDFs of all these.
Oh, excellent.
And so, would you wanna keep the paper, or just have the PDFs?
Let's keep one set.
Okay, so you keep the set.
Do you need a set as well?
no, the
Okay.
digital's, fine, so, related to that is at some point this does need to get sent to SHPO. It hasn't, they haven't reviewed anything, so also you wanna be at a point where you feel comfortable, sending these off to SHPO. With the caveat that at the State Historic Preservation Office. So.
That's because this is a national
Register.
register site.
So I don't think it's been entered into the, CRIS system, that's something we'll do. But the
No.
state will come back and comment on, whatever is supplied to them. So to the extent, that you want that to inform their
Mhm.
comment process, you should send it into the, board so that it can then be entered into the CRIS system.
Sure.
All right,
Is it
so
in- is it in
am I correct that this is what you would like to propose? I mean, is this
Okay.
the scheme that you would like SHPO to be?
The only thing that we have not had a chance to discuss with Steve when he did the pictures is the color. So as long as we're not
and
wedded
we
to
don't-
those colors.
We don't touch colors.
SHPO does not
We
care
have a
about
hard
color.
enough time with
And neither do
buildings
time for
and
that.
colors.
We care about it, we just aren't allowed to express our concerns.
Yes.
Sean cares about it.
Very deeply about it.
As important as it is.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess if, why don't you guys take a quick look and, because how big a file are these renderings?
Oh, they can be pretty small, yeah.
Okay, then,
We can,
if you could-
we can make them emailable, yeah.
all right, if you could send those files to Bonnie, as well as PDFs of the plans and a couple of the elevations.
Well, if we have Wi-Fi here, Stephanie can send it right now.
She's already on it.
If they're too large, you can also put them in a Dropbox,
Yeah.
and send them that way.
Yeah.
The other question just for the board is that, and it's entirely up to you, whether you feel the need for Alfondre to look at something or whether you're comfortable yourselves reviewing what's in front of you now. And that's entirely at your discretion. You may want this to, be detailed a little more before you send it off to Alfondre, so there's not again, it could be a very iterative process, or you could wait till it's more detailed. And you don't have to, it's in your discretion.
I think Alfondre was only apt to look at the condition of the existing building and the existing addition, and not so much to comment on the proposal.
Okay.
That's my understanding too.
Okay, so we will leave it at that. And then, as far as Mr. Diamond, I think once again, we have a updated site plan where you feel comfortable, what the limits of disturbance are going to be. And that's submitted, then we can get that to Joe Diamond, and I'm sure you'll send it off to Mr. Camisa, so that again, if there's any supplemental tests at all, you know, we'll make that determination.
Okay, so, unless somebody has, yes,
I just wanted to apologize, I didn't have the opportunity to introduce our son Dominic, he was parking the car so that I could get here on time.
Welcome to
So,
Cold Spring.
sorry, so,
you're welcome.
he's heard about the member, so do you want me to introduce you? or do
See,
you-
we're not as
See.
scary as they
There's definitely a
So
resemblance.
Kathleen,
sound. Hello.
Kathleen,
Yes,
Al,
I was
Andrea,
like,
Carol, and Sean.
Hi, thanks for coming.
Okay, so with that, why don't we move on to the secret portion? So Bonnie, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. So we did provide a draft of our memo previously, and we did update it once we received updated comment letters from Alfondre Architecture as well as from Joe Diamond. I do want to go over the dialogue, the conversation I had with EEC. And my memo, I will update and revise just so that it's clear with regard to the species, because I think I misread the comment letter from BEC, or the way I wrote it. It was not interpreted the way it should have been. So I did speak to Kathy Coffin and Jonathan Russell, and it was regard to the time periods within which work can be done. And so we're really dealing with two different species. One is the bald eagles that winter in the area, and the other is the northern long-eared bat. And the northern long-eared bat, their habitat are trees, especially dead, dying trees and exfoliating bark type trees where they can get in and roost. So with regard to the wintering bald eagles, they said no work is to be done between December 1st through March 31st. And when they mean work, they mean work. Exterior work, not just bulldozing, etc. You know, if you're up on the roof hammering or putting siding on, you know, they don't want that done. Unless you've had a dialogue with them and you've specified what you'd like to do within that time period and they're okay with it because there's an issue with noise. You know, we kind of discussed the fact that the rail, the train's right there, so, which is high noise, but maybe because it's intermittent as opposed to maybe going on all day long, you know, that's
So they have to coordinate
they have to
the hammering with the trains.
And so, you know, that's really DEC's review, but that was their concern. When I talked to them, it was a noise issue. And then with the northern long-eared bat, their concern has to do with tree clearing, which they only want conducted during November 1st through March 31st, because at that point the bats are in their hibernacula in their caves. Once we're beyond March 31st, they come out, they're in the trees, they start to roost, so that's why that time frame is there. So specifically when you can do work and when you can't do work, that November 1st through November 30th time period was that you couldn't do any tree removal. So it wasn't that you can only do work between November 1st and November 30th. It's just that any necessary tree removal must occur within that time period. But otherwise, the work issue is December 1 through March 31st because of the wintering bald eagle. And again, if you need to do anything or if you want to do anything during that time period, then you consult with DEC for a take permit. So I hope that makes sense and it kind of clarifies, and I think it makes sense for me just to update my memo with a revision date to make that clear.
So could I ask you a process question?
Mm-hmm.
So how would that work on the local level? We get through seeker, we get through the C of A process, they've got their building permits, and they've determined that they want to do work in that period.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a code?
It's a seeker. Well, I mean,
What triggers?
Who
Is it the
enforces
applicant
it?
themselves,
Right, who
the property owner
enforces it?
themselves calling, or is it our building inspector?
I think in terms of the seeker determination, so I think the EAF Part 3 is so they haven't submitted their EAF Part 3, and the EAF Part 3 is an opportunity for the applicant's representative and the applicant to indicate how they're going to address these potential impact concerns. Now, if they know that within this time period, they really need to engage in a particular activity, it would make sense to talk to DEC now and say, these are the limits of what we'd like to do during that time period, so that DEC can respond back to you, as the seeker lead agency, and say, yes, this can be done, or no, this can't be done. So that would be incorporated into the seeker finding statement.
So I guess the question is, if after this process is finished,
Right, and
and
then.
they get work going, some things always take longer than you expect,
Yep.
right? And they find that their schedule that was originally proposed to the DEC has shifted and needs modification. I guess I'm asking from an enforcement question, is
Yeah.
that something that the code enforcement officer worries about, or you all then update
No.
with seeker,
You-
I mean with DEC?
You have your
You do
You
determination.
do it directly with DEC.
Yeah, you have your determination. If they wanna make a change, they consult with seeker. If there's something that needs to be changed to the seeker determination, then it may be just an amended neg deck before you. It may be something that's nominal that doesn't have to come before you, but, the first person is the enforcement person who's going to determine whether they're staying within the parameters of the approval and the seeker determination. Again, if they wanna do something different, they have to go back to DEC, because ultimately it's their jurisdiction, for a permit and for that particular impact. However, you wanna make sure that whatever is done is still consistent with your negative declaration that you issued.
Okay, so you have this, the applicant or the applicant's rep has this consultation with DEC,
Mhm.
and they come to an agreement. What form does this agreement take? Is it some sort of permit?
It doesn't have to be a
Or
permit.
is it a letter?
It
that
may be a
gets-
letter, or maybe just a letter outlining.
There's some sort of confirmation from DEC that comes in writing.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, so that goes in the file of the local code enforcement officer?
And then it should go to you as well, since you were the seeker lead agency, to the extent that it differs from what you approved.
Okay. Okay.
So I think, I guess one of my questions would be, as part of Part 3 EAF, will you be anticipating certain activities during that time period? And would you go off to DEC and establish what the limits of those activities are?
I don't know the answer to that
Okay,
yet.
okay,
We did go to DEC for the 3 permits at 120, the 3 trees at 126. We went through that exercise to have that incorporated into the EAF, and with the ability to cut those 3 trees down outside of that 1-month limit. So hopefully we'll be able to identify things and get it done and not have to go back, but you're right, there are.
Well, I guess
there are
I'm thinking
occasions.
less about, again, because it's our first time through, we're asking these questions.
Yeah.
I'm thinking less about things like tree cutting and more about things like sound, which seems
Right.
a little ridiculous to me,
Yeah, I was
train
kind of-
being there, but.
It's kind of funny, because that Bonnie and I had this conversation a week or 2 ago. The issue that I was, with a different reviewer up there, the issue that they told me was visibility.
right.
It was just, I don't know why, but that's, I did address sound, but if you look at that, it more addressed visibility, and I said, okay,
Right.
and it was small too.
It could be the reviewer, it could be this particular site versus that particular site in
Mhm.
relation to where the bald eagles are
The nesting
wintering.
ground, yeah.
And it can be the fact that the DEC people you're talking to are in Albany and they may not know this site at all,
They.
oddly enough.
No, it's pretty much a mathematical process. I mean, they have a rule, it's 660 feet.
Right. They're management guidelines for the bald eagle. They're actual federal management guidelines that they follow. So, they do work within those guidelines.
Right.
And this is a pretty large site, so if you're talking 660 feet, you're way off the site.
It's around, no, it's around the nest, 660 feet is, once you get outside that, the rules get more
Okay.
free.
Right.
They want you to stay away from the nest, like 660 feet.
Right, and this is a little different because this isn't, that I know of, isn't necessarily about a nest, it's about the overwintering. So, at least that's what they said, and, that's what came
Yeah.
back. So unlike other areas where there actually is a nest, and you don't want disturbance to the nest because of the fledglings and, you know, that kind of activity. Here it's about, they're hanging out in the winter and they're foraging on the river. And so what disturbances and what's a concern is gonna be a little different for a wintering situation than for a nest.
It is differing, and here, but the wintering is not, doesn't have to be an eagle there to be concerned, because eagles apparently have multiple homes,
Mhm.
like wealthy or less. And they may winter in one and not come back to it for 3 or 4 years, winter in another, not come back for several years. My information is that their concern is for a nest that hasn't been used in 9 years. But still, the possibility of an eagle coming and occupying that nest over the winter is what they're concerned with.
So, you know, and whether they know exactly about this population, I would say of the species, the bald eagle are probably ones that they're monitor more than something like the northern long-eared bat, you know, and
They're bigger too.
they're bigger, they're easier to see, and they tend to be a species that not only may they monitor it, but just because people get excited about seeing bald eagle, they get calls, so from people who call it in. So they just may have more information about their location just from that alone.
Mm-hmm.
There's a weekly newsletter that DEC puts out with, talks about New York 62 and, you know, the nest numbers, and
Yeah.
they're careful about not advertising the locations, but they're pretty well known.
Yeah, they are. People tend to be protective of them too, so that, I just wanted to update you on that aspect of having talked to DEC, and again, I'll update my memo so that it's clear, because it wasn't. And,
All
I
right,
think that
let me
was-
ask the board members, anybody have any other questions or comments concerning the memo?
Not that we would address going through part 2.
I do not.
No.
Okay. So, and when you update it, you'll distribute it to us and also send a copy to the applicant?
yes, I will do that. So, the part 2 form, I provided a draft to the board to react to. And one of the things I just want to point out with regard to this form, and this form has been in use now for a little while, but something that's a little different than the old form is that they have 2 columns. And so it's no or small impact may occur is one column, and then the other column is moderate to large. And so even though there may be a small impact, you're not going to necessarily know, or whether there's not an impact, you're not going to know because you're checking off the same box. So, you know, we'll go through that, but just be aware of that. Impact on land, proposed action may involve construction on or physical alteration of the land surface of the proposed site. And the answer is yes, because there will be disturbance and there will be grading. From my perspective, if you look at the various items under that, with regard to the type of impacts or the magnitude of the impacts, from my perspective, given the amount of clearing that's proposed, and even with the increased, let's say, volume of the building or additional disturbance area, I don't think that rises to the level of being a moderate to large impact, you know, relative to, again, you know, just impact on the land.
You know, the only one that gave me any hesitation was the bedrock within 5 feet, because there's so much on the surface.
I don't know the
Here.
answer to that.
Well, you'll know soon enough.
Do you think that, if you were to encounter bedrock, would you blast, or would you rip, or would you just change the foundation?
Yeah.
Yeah, last year.
Oh, there's no blasting allowed anyway?
Blasting.
No, okay.
Question for you.
Yeah, no, I think we'd probably chip.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what, I mean, we don't have borings, there is a crawl space there, and there's no visible under the addition, which we've all had the pleasure of you know, crawling around in, and it's soil.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's no visible ledge showing up there, so
Right.
and that's, a good portion of that is where the proposed basement would be, and then otherwise we have slab,
Mhm.
which wouldn't involve any removal, so, I can't say that
So,
there would be nothing to chip to get that basement in at this point, because I, you know,
okay.
yeah, but it's, you know, we can't blast, so that's the process would be chipping.
And I think that then would, because of the fact you can't blast, that leaves it more in the scale of a small impact. Because if you had to blast and you were blasting, that changes. You know, the impact, because the impact to the actual structure itself, because it's historic and older foundation, et cetera, you know, never mind potential for having to look at sort of what's within a certain radius of the blasting area to make sure it's not going to impact any other structure. But I think if we're only talking about chipping and ripping, that's not, from my perspective, a large impact then. And again, I think your basement's limited in size,
Yeah.
and you said a lot of it's going to be on slab. Impact on geological features. Proposed action may result in the modification, destruction of, or inhibit access to any unique or unusual landforms on the site. If you go to the DEC website, it actually tells you what those geological significant forms are, and those are not present here on the site or in this area. Should we wait till Captain comes back, or?
I think she just went to the bathroom.
Okay.
When nature calls.
I know.
I think actually out of the 18 sections in the part 2,
They're very few.
yeah, there are only 3 that go to moderate or large impact,
Yeah.
at least in our draft. And they are that, the impact on land, which we say yes, but it's a no or small impact.
Right.
And then the impact on aesthetic resources and
There's also,
Plants and animals.
plants and animals, right. Plants and animals, yeah, right. Plants and animals, impact on aesthetic resources and impact on historic and archaeological resources.
Right.
So, I mean, we know at least that we will have to go to a part 3
For that reason.
for that reason.
Right.
Yeah.
We just discussed impact on geological features. There aren't any significant, unusual, unique landforms. Impact on surface water, there are no wetlands, there are no streams, no impact. Groundwater, this isn't a significant, you're not doing something that would impact groundwater and introduce contaminants by nature of the action. Flooding, you're not proposing anything within the floodway or the floodplain, so no impact. Impact on air, the energy that you would use, boilers, et cetera, it's not of the magnitude that would be an impact on air. You know, it's a single house. Plants and animals is where we said yes, and that's because of the information that came back from the New York State DEC. And so, you know, what's checked as moderate to large is the reduction or degradation of habitat used by any rare, threatened, or endangered species. So that's the potential for the moderate to large impact, which, based on that, the applicant would respond in an EAF Part 3. Impact on agricultural resources, this is an ag land, so no impact. Aesthetic resources, we checked, yes.
Yeah, I've got a question on that.
On aesthetic or ag?
On aesthetic resources.
Okay.
I guess, what's the definition of scenic or aesthetic resources as opposed, I mean, are we talking about a building or scenic resources? What I normally assume is, you know, like vistas and so on.
So it's, so this area of the Hudson River is designated at the state level as a scenic area of statewide significance.
Okay.
So it's just from that perspective a designated scenic area.
Okay.
And then, there could be a locally designated scenic resource, again, state, county, but that's kind of what triggered the fact that it's scenic, because you're just in a region that's scenic.
Right. One other question under C, I see you've got both seasonal and year-round checked.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if it's year-round, then it's visible all year round, so it wouldn't be seasonal.
I think what isn't asked in this question, or again, because we're filling out a form,
Right.
is it could be different vantage points.
Okay.
So, let's say from the train station, where there's no vegetative covering, it's going to be year-round.
Mm-hmm.
If you're on the river, if you're in the marsh, and you're on a paddle boat, that might be more seasonal. So, again, just taking into consideration different vantage points, it may be visible from some places seasonally.
Okay.
And again, the way that the form is filled out is that you exceed a threshold, then you're supposed to check off moderate to large. Some of these statements are kind of qualitative, so it's not even quite a threshold. But I think in terms of aesthetic resources, because this is a historic site and because you are in the SASS, the SAS, from my perspective, I recommended checking off the moderate to large impact so that the applicant could provide, a response as part of the Part 3. And, their response would include how they're designing the building and how they're minimizing views or how it's going to be aesthetically attractive, et cetera. Impact on historic and archaeological resources. That's
Sorry, could I just ask about
Sure.
D, 9D?
Yeah.
Is there a reason why we're considering routine travel by residents, including travel to and from work, to be no or small, but the recreation is moderate
to large?
to large? I would think they would both be moderate to large because a lot of our residents are traveling to and from work via the train.
Right.
I had the same thought, Sean.
Unless that's something that would only relate to the people within the resource being the river?
Part of this, well, I think the bigger, so because it's it's tourism based and recreational based, as a use, the impact from the enjoyment of that, from my perspective, I thought would be moderate to large, whereas, again, this judgment
Nobody
call.
enjoys their commutes?
Well,
No. But if you feel that, again, because people are embarking and disembarking from the train station.
Well, the
It really
question
is,
is,
though.
the
Yeah.
situation or activity in which viewers are engaged while viewing the proposed action
Is
is
routine travel.
by residents.
Right.
Yes. But including travel to and from work.
Right,
Mhm.
and so if there is a change in that view shed from routine traveling to and from work, because of the changes to the structure, is that a moderate to large impact? When you're viewing and you're a tourist, or if you're a paddle boater, your sense of enjoyment and the scenic view may be very impacted.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you're going to work, you're getting on the train, are you on that side of the train where you see it? Are you getting off at that state?
So is the question just what I think you're saying about tourism is
Mhm.
someone gets off the train and they're going to see a work site. The end product is a much improved building, right? So yes, it's a temporary major impact,
Mhm.
and its major impact will be a positive one down the road. I don't see how that doesn't apply to people using the train station every day.
Right.
It's the same thing, because they're gonna have a
Right.
period of time when they're
We're
seeing
not
this
talking-
disrupted site and then an improved
We're
site.
not so much talking about I don't think we're so
Construction.
much talking about the construction.
Right.
It's a temporary, really unavoidable
Uh-huh.
impact.
Right.
You can, and I guess there are things you could do to mitigate that impact, but, you're not gonna wait to have a stand of trees put up between the building and the railroad. I think we're really talking about the time people take to enjoy the view and say, oh my God, why did they do that? It's gonna be very different for somebody who's here for recreational purposes than somebody who's, if it's like my wife goes in once a week, we drop her off at the train, she runs before they close the door and gets
Right.
going.
So the wording is the situation or activity, and so, again, some of these are qualitative in your call, and if you think that viewing this
I would argue for valuing those two
the same.
communities of people
Okay.
equally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just because it will set precedent
Exactly.
when we review this process in the future with other properties.
Right.
And, you know, many people from this community travel on the train every single day, and
Right.
that is a huge part of their experience, so I would put that on par with the people who are just out for a day on the river,
Okay.
because they don't experience that view shed the same way we do.
Okay.
So I would say they're equally important, just to set the precedent for the future.
Okay.
And also the moderate to large impact may be an improvement
Exactly, that's the
for
purpose.
people who are standing at the train
Well,
station.
Right now, we're
and-
looking
and-
right now.
at derelict property,
Right.
Well, it
so.
looks like a cracked in,
Yeah.
I mean,
as dangerous
we're not
as
saying
the
it's
last
not
one.
It has a bit of a.
You know,
Enjoy that time period.
If you
Meth lab
check
quality.
it as moderate, you know, what it really means is that in the par 3, you'll explain.
Gotta
That
be-
it's gonna be better.
gotta explain.
Right. So, you know, I think you can check it, you know, and again, that's your call as the lead agency, and you know your community best. So you agree
Does
to
anybody
make,
have any objection to checking it moderate to large?
No.
all right, so we'll
Moderate
make
to
that
large.
change. Any other comments on 9?
Nope.
Okay. 10, impact on historic and archaeological resources. All of them were check moderate to large.
Why do we have a no on, just curious, why you have, other is no?
Because we didn't identify another impact or other
If we
impact.
said yes, we would need to identify
Right.
another.
Yeah. So, okay, historic and archaeological, impact on open space and recreation. This isn't publicly, used recreational opportunity, or, it's not really a reduction in open space resource area, so I recommended checking no. Impact on critical environmental area, this isn't a designated CEA, at this time. Your LWRP could change that if it gets adopted, but right now it's not, so we can check no. Impact on transportation, the increase from a single dwelling in vehicular trips isn't going to be significant or moderate impact, so that's no. Impact on energy, this isn't, again, as an individual house, going to introduce an energy resource or utilize energy to a point where it would be significant or moderate to large impact. Impact on noise, odor, and light. I checked no. I mean, this is going to be household lighting. You may want to understand what the lighting is going to be just from the aesthetic aspect of it, but I don't think from the potential of the lighting levels themselves to impact the environment that it's significant.
There was,
Oh,
I'm sorry.
Scenic Hudson has very strict guidelines on that, I know that
yeah.
you saw in the.
In conservation easement.
Yes, very strict guidelines.
Somewhere you raised the question, Bonnie, about
Lighting.
exterior lighting that had not been addressed yet. Obviously, that's a design element, but I can't remember where you were asking that.
My question was whether you were going to introduce lighting coming up the driveway, either putting in low bollards, or if any kind of lighting that might
here,
be
yeah.
standalone, individual on the site. In part because if you're going to trench it, and it's not within an area that's already disturbed, we need to show it on the site plan so that the archaeologist took a look at what might be trenched. So it was related to the area of potential effect and what the archaeologist may have to review. So as I said, there's the aesthetic element, but there's also just, what are you planning to do in terms of lighting, or are you gonna all basically stay within that driveway area so that you don't have to be concerned about additional shovel tests and archaeological evaluations?
Stay within the driveway.
Yeah.
That was D2N where you raised that question.
Right. So are you considering any kind of lighting, or at this point, nothing? Okay.
Cars have headlights.
Right. Okay. Very good. And then there's impact on human health, there's a variety of miscellaneous questions in terms of whether you're near hazardous waste, a solid waste, a landfill, leachate, et cetera, licensed daycare facilities, et cetera. So, our response to that, our suggested response is no, there wouldn't be an impact. And then consistency with community plans, because you have, I just hate the way they word these, but the question is really, is it consistent with community plans, even though they say it's not consistent with adopted land use plans, so it's like a double negative. So my response is no. And then consistency with community character, they asked, the proposed project is inconsistent with existing community character, and my recommendation would be no, you're not introducing a land use that is significantly different than what's in the community and in that location. So I think at this point, and I don't know if there's any other items you want to touch upon, but this needs to then be updated to change the response to 9D, where routine travel by residents would be checked moderate to large. Sounds right?
Anybody have any other questions or comments?
The other stuff that was all on part 1, and that's been communicated to Glenn for the areas that need to be adjusted.
Right. And I think, at the time that the part 3 is filled out, and again, the kind of limits of disturbance are really known, they can resubmit the part 1, so that it reflects the appropriate limits of disturbance and whatever other information has to be updated within the part 1. So I will update the part 2, and then, I don't know that you've shared this yet, or will you share this once I update it?
I have it.
You have it? Okay. So you know what has to be addressed in terms of a part 3 then? Okay. So that's seeker at this point in time.
Cool.
Fantastic.
All right, so the next step is that the applicant prepares part 3, and then we review the part 3, which is all the mitigations to
Right.
the impacts that were identified.
Right. And then I think, and again, I think getting this up to the State Historic Preservation Office, they may have comments that you will want to consider as part of, your seeker evaluation. So, it'd be good to get that to them sooner than later at this point, now that you have especially renderings and elevations and more information that will guide their comment process.
So who's working with the clerk on that?
And I'm happy to help, because I've entered things into the CRIS system, so.
That might be a more efficient way of getting it in to have Bonnie,
Yeah.
have Bonnie do it.
Well, actually, I'm just looking at this on the February 12th memo, you list around 15 documents that you looked at, and I can see about 2/3 of those might go into the CRIS system, and that's about it. So you already have access to them, and you've already, reviewed them and laid them out, so, it probably would be the most efficient way of going.
Yeah.
And now you have, you
Rather
will
than
have
having a
these.
village
Yeah, we'll
clerk,
forward the
trying to
PDFs
find
of
them.
everything
Before-
forward it to everybody, just
Yeah.
to be sure.
Before I load them up, I'll just send you a list of what I am going to send, just so you should be comfortable with what I'm adding to the CRIS system, so you know, as a board. But I will give you that list, and then we'll endeavor to get this done by Friday.
Okay,
Okay,
great.
excellent.
Thank you.
Great.
Super.
I like the standing seam roof.
Okay.
I love
I like the standing seam roof that you're adding in location. Sharp. Oh, well done.
Thank you.
And you got more windows too.
And you got more windows.
She got more windows. Happy kid.
Put bigger
Bigger
Panes
footprint,
on
and
Thanks for coming.
lots of changes. All right. Anything else you wanna cover for this application, or you're good?
Any questions for Bonnie?
No.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very
welcome.
much,
Thanks
Bonnie.
so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You got you out of
See you
here
next
before
meeting.
9:30.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
See you, nice to meet you.
Thank
Donna.
you.
Bye.
Okay.
We want to put these on.
Yeah, someone, it looks like someone made a mess of our box and we didn't really look at it. That's what I need, somebody put zoning board stuff in our box.
That should go in there also.
Good night, folks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you, Bonnie.
Okay, you've got my agenda.
Okay. Next on the list, 11 High Street.
Didn't bring the whole family?
Not the whole family.
So much fun.
Most of them
God willing.
So I checked the property and there were no bald eagles.
Excellent.
Wonderful.
If there was one, you wouldn't know it.
You would sell your house, that's what you would do.
I have
Okay,
a
now,
dozen vultures sitting on top of my roof
Mm.
last week,
Um,
because the vultures are back.
I read the story that there was this farm over across the river, I forget what the kind of is. But this farm, for some reason, turkey vultures decided to roost there. And they had a lot of turkey vultures. And I don't know if you've ever seen them, but they're big.
Yeah, they're disgusting.
Yeah,
And,
They have ugly faces, but the rest of their bodies is beautiful.
None of this has anything to do with Evan's
and
deck.
and
Bring it
the
all
thing,
back in.
the thing is that the resident in that farm said it was a very weird feeling coming home with a whole bunch of vultures sitting in there.
Waiting for you.
All right. But now we already did the secret classification, right?
Let's see.
Didn't we
My
do it
notes.
last time?
I don't remember.
All right,
Type
well,
2.
do I have a motion
It is
to
type 2, but I
secret, in
don't-
case we don't have on record? Do I have a motion concerning the secret?
I will move that it is a type 2 action.
And I will second that.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Look at that. Okay. When we last left,
Yeah, you wanted,
well,
more specific drawings, so I brought these. Hopefully this will help. And I talked to a couple of contractors to get different ideas, and it seemed like the committee, the board last time was concerned a lot about the understructure of the deck and the visibility of it. So originally we were thinking of having them flush, but I think the best design would probably be to have it cantilevered and have lattice covering the sonotubes and posts under the deck. So the contractors have told me that you can do a 2 foot, up to 2 foot cantilever going in both directions. So we can do the maximum cantilever with the square lattice that's, you know, the typical approved lattice of the village. I don't even think you'll see them with bushes in front of them. Now, the one that's most visible, you can see the top right. No, I'm sorry, maybe
It's okay, I'm looking with Al.
the top drawing shows the slope that, you know, the post will be 5 feet on the right side, but that's the back. It's the back side of the house, so the most visible part is the least visible from the street. The most visible part, if you look at the top left drawing, half of the deck is blocked by the outcrop. I don't know if it's like a bay window or a bow window.
Here's the
But
post.
it's blocked by that structural part of the house. In the original drawing, we had a staircase going up from the side of that bump out. We decided to simplify it and eliminate that staircase. Just to have fewer visible stairs, have a little more area on the deck.
Can you pull
Just
that
make
over?
one.
Oh, on the, toward the street, you mean?
Yeah, so we got rid of the stairs on the street side, and we'll just have some kind of, you know, you know, stones, kind of stepping stones, path going to the single staircase.
Okay, when you're talking about where the square lattice goes, are you talking about that being set back
Yeah,
with the cantilever?
yeah.
So that the
If you feel that's necessary, I can do that. I mean, it might be
Is
even
it-
not
is it-
very
is it-
cantilevered visible anyway,
Because,
but
well,
still.
the cantilever is a material, it's a structural issue, but the, where the lattice goes would be tucked under the deck or would be flush
That's
with
what
the
I
sides
thought.
of the deck?
Yes.
So you're gonna have three posts, and each one is going to be boxed out using lattice? Or
No,
you're
I'm
gonna
not
have
gonna-
lattice that's coming here?
Correct.
Okay, I see.
So the lattice would be coming just enough to cover the sonotubes, is that it? And the thing, it would not be
Well-
out at the edge of the deck.
That's
Well,
what I had
But it would be only on two sides, right? I mean, how far, does it project beyond the house? On this side?
5 feet on that side.
That's 5 feet, so,
You can
It'll
see it
be
on this
here,
drawing
yeah.
better.
yeah. No, I mean, as far as the lattice is gonna be underneath here.
Yeah.
It's gonna go across here, but over here you have part of the house, so you don't need to run the lattice. Anything
No,
further,
on the other side.
This is completely open here.
it's completely open.
This bumps up here, this hides.
This is the corner of the house. It'll go right
Yeah,
up to the
okay.
end of the house.
Right.
The whole thing will be painted, probably, I know you don't deal with color, but you are very passionate about color.
Mhm.
It'll probably be similar or the same gray as the molding, that's the trim on the house. So we have minimal painted trim now, just so you know. The bottom part will be pressure treated wood. Top part, I know you said you don't allow pressure treated wood, so we're looking at cedar as that.
The thing that I wanted to confirm, I assume that you had someone help you draw this. This looks like sort of one of those prefab railings, but you were looking at Al, you were looking at Anne's railing. Yeah, which, see,
Right.
okay, just making sure, because these
Is
are,
it different?
yeah, these, you see how the balusters sit on top of the rails,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to being between the rails?
I see.
So this is
Oh, I
sort of
see,
classic
I didn't
prefab,
see the
and this is,
difference
yeah.
there. Yeah.
I think they were
Well,
using
that-
SketchUp.
I think they were
looks-
using SketchUp or something too, but just making
Used,
sure.
Dex.com.
Dex.com.
They have a free app for building Dex.
Oh,
Um,
bad.
They don't allow you to
I-
cantilever, so I use white.
It's not gonna make any difference as far as the application, just to let you know. What you're proposing here means you're gonna have this girder, which carries these beams, is actually gonna be